Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is November 12th, 2021, and we are now officially in part two of our, what I would call, epic, important, inspiring interview with the one, the only, Anthony Magnabosco. Anthony, welcome back to Mormon Stories podcast.
Thanks for having me back. Part two. Let's do it.
I loved our interview last night. You said I don't want to mischaracterize what you said, but it was a different interview than what you normally have, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, I was thinking about it afterwards. You asked a lot of questions that I normally get, but then you went 5 steps further on those questions, which I don't normally get. So
was that tedious and obnoxious?
It wasn't either. It wasn't either of those. It was just unexpected, and I guess I wasn't expecting it. It was just kind of threw me off a little bit.
Well, so for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, who didn't hear part one yesterday, we spent a good 3 hours interviewing Anthony Magnabosco about his life, about what led him, his early years, what led him to have an interest in secular thought, in rational thought, in skeptical inquiry, and even the atheist movement, and eventually what led him to create Street Epistemology as an approach. And then we talked a lot about what it's like to try and be an educator / activist and social media presence or personality and to run a nonprofit. So it's for me, it was a fascinating 3 hours. It was a real honor to have you, Anthony. And today we are going to be doing something different. We're going to shift gears. Today we're going to be doing, as part one, an introduction to Street Epistemology. And yeah, for those who are just trying to understand why this is interesting or important, Anthony's never been Mormon. He is a never Mormon guest, as we call them. And the reason why I think we're bringing Anthony to you, my audience, is because one of the biggest problems within Mormonism is when you leave a high demand religion, when you lose your faith in a high demand religion, you still have a spouse, potentially, if you were married, or siblings or parents or children or ward members, friends, family, who are still Orthodox believers. And they are, as we've well chronicled on Mormon Stories podcast, they're going to be disappointed in you. They're going to be sad for you. They're going to be afraid for you. And they're going to be angry at you sometimes. And that's going to lead to conversations where you try and convince them that you're a good person, and you try and even take their beliefs away from them or make them come to learn the same things you've come to learn. And we all know how that ends. That ends with contention and anger and frustration, antagonism. It ruins relationships, and it even creates what we call the backfire effect, which is where sometimes you leave the Orthodox believer clinging more tightly to their beliefs than they were before you had the conversation. And why in the world would you want to do that? But most importantly, at Mormon Stories podcast, we are against people's relationships being destroyed over a set of magic-based beliefs. And so we are bringing Anthony here. We flew him here because Anthony's going to help us learn a technique called Street Epistemology that can be useful in our conversations with believing loved ones. Not to change their beliefs, not to further worsen the relationship, but to help them become more introspective about beliefs in general and their beliefs specifically, and your point of view. The discussion of epistemology, or why we believe, is one of the most central tenets of understanding Mormonism and ex-Mormonism. And so Anthony is going to give us tools through Street Epistemology to help us talk to our believing loved ones, family, and friends. And if it weren't enough to have Anthony on the podcast, we also are blessed to have Kara Burrell.
Oh, me? Oh, hey, thanks. That's nice.
How was last night? Did you have a good time?
Oh, yeah.
Why is your voice a little bit
I was
deeper?
Screaming. Chelsea Homer puts on a great party at Wise Guys with Alan Mount. And yeah, my voice is a little bit low and raspy. It's good for radio. Welcome.
It's good to have you, Kara. And thanks. Kara, we mentioned this yesterday. Kara was a huge, before Kara was ever a listener to Mormon Stories, maybe even before she was a Bill Reel fan, she was an Anthony Magnabosco fan. So she's a true disciple of street epistemology.
Oh boy.
And she's the one who, she didn't twist my arm, but she's like, hey, why isn't Anthony on? And I'm like, oh, we tried. Anyway, Carrie, you're a big reason why we have Anthony here.
Oh, good. Everyone can leave their comments about how grateful they are to have me on the podcast then.
You're well loved by 90% of my audience. You're well loved.
Direct all of your compliments to me. Anthony is the reason I'm here. Just kidding. No, it's just really important. And again, to just echo back what John said, I don't want any more relationships ruined over differing beliefs. And if this is just one more tool that people can utilize in their relationships with their believing family and friends, I'm so grateful to Anthony. You flew out from Texas just to come kind of teach us some of the way that you think better conversations, cordial conversations can happen. So thanks for coming out.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be here to talk about that because that is a common desire for people who stumble across this method. They have already had bad conversations. They've damaged those relationships with their loved ones. And usually they're trying to pick up the pieces. But if we can get these tools into people's hands ideally before they have those bad conversations and jeopardize the relationships, that's even better. But even if you've had a poor conversation with somebody or jeopardized, you can still recover from it using these tools. And probably what will happen is once you start realizing how to use these tools, you're going to never want to go back to the old way of engaging with people, which is usually debating with them and arguing with them and comparing verses in the holy book to say how silly it is or something along those lines. So this is a different approach, and it's counterintuitive too. A lot of people think that I should be giving people the facts that I found convincing because they will find them as well. And that's one of the quickest ways to shut down the conversation if you go about it that way. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for flying me out again to talk, find out a little bit more about myself, which is what we did yesterday, and now today to get into the nuts and bolts of SE.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, looking
Beautiful.
forward to it.
Okay, and then later we're going to have the one, the only Sean McCraney sit down with Anthony Magnabosco, and they're going to do street epistemology together. So that's going to be super fun. We're really stoked. All right, so Anthony, let's back up. This is going to be slightly repetitive because we covered this a bit yesterday, and you just talked about it a bit. From the top, just tell us flat out, what are the conversations that are not often helpful, and why are they not helpful that then led you to want to create that led you to want to create street epistemology? What should people never do?
Probably things that you should never do.
Or that aren't helpful. Let's just say that aren't helpful.
Yeah. The things that people tend to do that aren't helpful is to share with your loved ones or even a stranger, if you discover that they want to talk with you about this belief, is to provide them with the reasons that you found convincing. That's kind of a crapshoot. You could get lucky and maybe offer a reason why you decided that you can't believe this stuff anymore. And they may also find it compelling, but more likely than not, they have other reasons. They have different reasons for thinking that this stuff is true. So one of the biggest mistakes that we make is discussing reasons that don't have any bearing whatsoever on the person's certainty that their belief claim is true, which can lead to frustration on both sides. Like if I'm the one having the belief and I'm being asked about reasons that aren't my reasons, I would be kind of perplexed. Why are we talking about this? And if I'm the questioner, I'm likely going to get frustrated because I'm not seeing any progress in the conversation because I'm not talking about the reasons that are their reasons. So that's one of the biggest things. Another thing that we tend to do, I think, is we tend to let these conversations go on way too long. With the SE approach, I found that shorter conversations are better, where you can spend 5 or 10 minutes. You've established trust and rapport, and you ask your good question. You notice a moment of reflection, and that's usually a good indication of when to end the talk and then offer to meet again. With the idea that you've stimulated their thinking about their thoughts, and the best thing to do is back off and let them think about it. But what we tend to do is if we notice a moment of reflection, we tend to pile on and keep asking more questions. It could be really addictive when you see somebody pondering a belief that you don't think is right or correct, and they do, and you notice that they're thinking about it. It could be really tough to stop the conversation. That's probably another mistake that we make. There's probably several more that I can get into if you wanted me to.
No, those are good. Yeah. Yeah. So we do conversations wrong. in so many ways regarding all sorts of beliefs. And so street epistemology seeks to help people have more effective conversations. Yeah.
That's it.
So give us the foundational kind of philosophical underpinnings of street epistemology. You mentioned Socratic method. Give us the foundations.
Well, the foundation of SE, I suppose, starts with the idea that we likely can't ever say that we know anything for certain, that there's value in uncertainty. There's value in saying, I don't know. That's probably one of the biggest things. Another, I guess, foundation of SE is that we tend to approach our conversations with the idea that there's an objective truth, that our beliefs are not just a matter of opinion. We can have beliefs that are opinions, but when we have beliefs that are fact claims about reality, that claim is either true or not true. It can't be both. So that's another assumption that we have. And then there's several assumptions. As I'm kind of thinking back to the course that we're writing in, we have a list of like 10 assumptions that we make. Another assumption is that people are actually separate from their beliefs. So I'm a human and I'm simply acquiring beliefs as I'm navigating life. And if I get rid of a belief, I'm still a person who might just now hold a different belief or think that that belief is less likely to be true. So we try to make a distinction between the belief and the person. So we want to disentangle ourselves from our beliefs so that we can critically examine them. And that's what we do in SE. We want to explore the person's reasoning process that they used to arrive at their conclusion. So we're not going after the conclusion. We're going after the method that they use to confirm that the conclusion is true. It's a big shift in the approach.
It's radical in the sense that it's going to the roots, right, of their beliefs. Right? Yeah. Not radical in the sense of like being extreme, but...
Right. Radical in that, a typical engagement is we usually tend to argue about the claim itself or the definitions of words or things along those lines. And with SE, we're kind of along for the ride. Yeah, so like with SE, with street epistemology, we're not so much focused on the claim, but how they concluded that their claim is true. And that's a big shift in thinking because what we tend to do is argue the claim. And we don't really get to the meat of what's propping it all up. And that's what we really try to do. But we try to make it a collaborative process as well. I want to work with you to get down to the foundation. And sometimes, for many people, this is the first time that they've explored their foundation. Because sometimes they just realize, oh, I'm going to church every week and I'm doing all these prayers and I guess I have this belief. And a lot of people don't take the time to consider, well, why? Why do I have this? Do I have it because I think it's true or for some other reason? And that's the exploration that we try to go on with our conversation partner.
And so the word epistemology is a 10-cent word, as some would say. So we talked about this yesterday, but tell our listeners what that word means.
Yeah, epistemology is officially the study of knowledge. When we're talking about epistemology in street epistemology, we're interested in the manner with which you check the quality of your reasons. So if we identify a claim, I think God is real, for example, and then we identify your main reason that contributes to your confidence that that claim is correct. Let's say it says so in this book. We're interested in how you concluded that that's a good reason. Do you have the ability to test that reason in some way? And that's usually where the reflection happens, because a lot of people may have never performed a test in the first place, or their idea of what a test is a little off, possibly. Like, well, yeah, I prayed and I got the feeling, and that confirmed it for me that it was true. That was my test. So it's asking questions to take a look and see if your process that you use for confirming those reasons is reliable and robust. Could somebody use that exact same process for confirming a similar reason, but arrive at a different conclusion about a different God? And if they can do that, then there's possible liabilities with your reasoning that you've used to get to your conclusion. But it's not like we say, aha, so you're wrong. Usually we'll help the person possibly discover that that's the case. And then we end the talk so that they can think about it, give them some time, invite them to come back, because maybe they have a completely different reason when you meet with them a second time. Or maybe they've actually lowered their confidence in their claim because you've caused them to think about it.
I mean, when I'm thinking about the way Mormonism works, well, most importantly, you're born into it. Like most of the active Orthodox, super passionate Mormons were born into it. And so they were conditioned from a very young age, or taught or educated, depending on what word you want to use, that the church is true. And all your friends and family know it is true. And they all talk about their knowledge about the church being true every week in church and 5 times during the week as you're growing up. And so everybody around you knows it's true. And then all of the social reinforcers are conditioning you, along with the education, to also conclude that it's true.
Why would you ever question it?
Right.
That's the situation for a lot of people, is that they've never even considered to question these things, which in and of itself I think is a problem. But usually if you find yourself in a situation where you can use this approach, you can ask the person, would you mind if I questioned you about these things? And hopefully they're amenable to it. And if so, you're going to probably have a good talk.
And I don't want to give the ending away, but most Mormons who are raised Mormon, they get to this point in adolescence where they're smart enough to say, well, I guess lots of other people raised in lots of other faiths believe passionately what they were taught. So how do I know that this is my testimony, as we call it in Mormonism, versus something that my parents just gave me? Borrowed light, as it's called in Mormonism. And so we'll go to girls' camp, or we'll go to youth conference, or we'll go to, we'll read the Book of Mormon, and we're taught that the Holy Ghost, which is God's right-hand person, if you feel in a religious context setting, reading the Book of Mormon, attending church, going to the temple, whatever it is, youth conference, girls' camp, if you're in a religious Mormon context and you feel things like joy, peace, calm, tingling feelings, that is the Holy Ghost from God bearing witness to you that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is God's one true church on the earth, that Joseph Smith was God's one true prophet in the modern era, and that the Book of Mormon is God's true scripture and the most correct book on the face of the earth. And so once you have that feeling and you've been taught to associate that with the church being true, then you're often locked in.
For sure.
And that's how it happens in the Mormon born under the covenant sort of scenario. And then there's a slight derivation of that, which is kind of you convert to the church at some point because you stumble on the missionaries, or you have a cute Mormon girl or boy that you fall in love with. And and then you meet with the missionaries and you have the discussions, and somehow at some point along the way, you're told about Moroni's promise. And you're told that if you feel something very good during this missionary discussion or while reading the Book of Mormon, that's the Holy Ghost. And that means you should get baptized in the church. And then people do. So that's kind of how Mormons are conditioned to know. That's Mormon epistemology. If you feel tingly, warm, overwhelming positive emotion, or what is the other word for that type of emotion?
Elevated emotion?
Elevated emotion. Thank you, Kara. If you feel elevated emotion, that's the Holy Ghost testifying to you that it's true. Kara, would you add anything to what I said?
Yeah, and I think music is also a big part of that. Mormons love music. We have Mormon Tabernacle Choir. We have General Conference. We learn about the lives of the prophets and just what good human beings come out of Mormonism. And so you're very much conditioned that if this is the path of God, because look at all these happy families, look at the way that the music makes you feel. It's an entire lifestyle, a whole package where you see with kind of blinders on of what a good life leads to. And then you do have that motivated reasoning to keep feeling the Spirit, to keep going down this path. You're not ever really exposed to alternative, other types of religions, other secular ways of living. So it's just kind of compounding on each other year after year in your youth to the point where either you get married in the temple in your early 20s,
go on a mission,
or late teens, or go on a mission. And that's where the church really has to lock you in right then, because you're having young kids and stuff. So
but the best
youth
way,
program. The
best way to reinforce an epistemology that's been given to you is to have you become the teacher for that doctrine or philosophy. So if you really want to lock someone into an ideology, have them teach it. And that's why the Mormon missionary program, and you interview Mormon missionaries
I was lucky
on your episode.
Yeah, I was lucky to run into a few just coincidentally. They happened to be walking by. And that was interesting because they mentioned very similar things. And this was a surprise for me because I've interviewed people from all different kinds of religions, but the LDS Church, I think, might be the only one that is explicit in how you can test the truth of it. Now, personally, I think going off of a feeling is a horrible way to confirm a test, but it's really great because in SE, we do want to explore how you are confirming that this stuff is true. So like a really good question would be something along the lines of, can somebody experience a feeling that could be confused for the Holy Spirit, but in reality is a normal human emotional feeling? And most people will say yes to that. And then a good SE question is, well, how can we tell the difference, or how do you tell the difference? If you had a feeling of burning in your bosom, for example, and it crossed your mind, is this from myself or is this from the Holy Spirit? How do you go about figuring it out? What would what would it look like if it wasn't true? How would it be any different? And then it's stepping back and letting the person think about it and reflect on it and then give you their answer. And I would listen very closely to their answer. I'd probably repeat it back, and then we'd go on from there.
So that leads me. So epistemology is how we know things.
How we know things.
And so street epistemology is rooted in helping people become more aware and intentional and thoughtful about what they think they know and what they say they know and how they seem they know it, right?
I couldn't say it any better. That's exactly what SE is, yeah.
And then what is the street part?
The street part is a bit of a misnomer. I think the author who started it or coined the term,
which is, for those who didn't
Peter
hear part one.
Boghossian.
Okay,
Dr.
yeah.
Peter Boghossian in 2013 wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists, and I think on the very first couple pages he mentioned street epistemology. And I think he defines street meaning layperson, non-academic, simple, that type of thing, casual. This isn't an academic pursuit. It can really be done by anybody, which appealed to me because I'm not an academic. I don't have a degree in philosophy or anything along those lines or psychology.
But you're freaking smart, okay?
I wish I did. In hindsight, I wish I did have a degree in psychology. So that appealed to me. A tool that could be used by any person to challenge deeply held beliefs was extremely appealing to me. So that's the street part of it. It doesn't mean go out on the street and evangelize for atheism or even critical thinking.
But that's how you kind of got a name for yourself, is you would go do that.
I was looking for examples, so I literally went out on the street. I would go to in front of the Alamo, like we talked about yesterday, and talk to the street preachers, or on college campuses and quiet trails to talk to people. Because I wanted to see, what are the people in my community thinking? And maybe more importantly, how are they thinking? Are they thinking carefully about their thoughts? Mm-hmm. And one thing that I discovered in talking to like hundreds of people, thousands maybe, regardless of the age, the reasons that we give to back up our conclusions are not very well thought out across the board. And you would think on a deeply held belief that those would be the ones that we spent the most time on. But it seems like believers don't. They don't spend a lot of time on it. Now, non-believers do. Once you realize, I've had this deeply held belief for so long and it's been so core to my identity, and now I'm starting to realize it's probably not real, then you, I think, find yourself maybe thinking about your thoughts more. But the typical believer, I don't think really does.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to be bringing Sean McCraney in for you to illustrate this. And as someone who's trying to architect a meaningful podcast, I'm struck by the idea that us talking about street epistemology is very conceptual, because if we just did it, people are going to get it way faster than if we talk about what it is. But
that's why I went out to record videos, John, because I wanted to show people how to do it, because talking about it and explaining it gets lost. But if you can observe it, then it really starts dawning on you.
Which makes me wonder if we should do some like light role play as a way to just set up what you're about to do with Sean.
Actually,
but also you had some ideas, Kara. So I want to make sure you feel okay about that, because you also had some other things you wanted to do.
Whatever you guys come up with, I think we can use as a vehicle for me to outline the steps of SE. So we can go wherever you guys want.
What do you think, Kara?
You wanted to start a role play right now?
Well, here's what I'm thinking. Let's not do a full-on role play.
Yeah.
Let's do a super light role play.
Sure.
Just as a way for us to tell our viewers and listeners what they're about to experience with Sean to give them an idea of what to look for.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then if we want to follow up, Kara, with your idea, we can do that after Sean.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay. So what are you thinking?
Well, what I'm thinking is that the situation is a factor here. So if this is a one-on-one interview with a stranger, it's going to be a completely different approach. Well, I'll still be using the steps, but more emphasis will be placed on certain areas if I knew the person or this was a loved one or a family member. So if this was a family member, I might say, would you mind if I use an interview technique with you called Street Epistemology to challenge your view that you have here? I want to slip out of our normal conversation mode, slip to an interview mode where I'm asking you questions, maybe for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we can end the talk, and then we can just go back to our regular conversational style. Is that cool? That's probably what I would recommend for family and friends. So your scenario is kind of a factor here. So if we're going to be role-playing somebody on the street, or
It's
if this is a
different
family
than if
member,
it's a believing family member.
yeah, I just want to point that out at the start that
Okay.
that the venue or the situation is a little bit of a factor.
Okay. Okay. So we're not going to go deep into a role play. We're just going to kind of give a bit of an introduction to street epistemology. And it's going to be heavy where we just do some very light role play, but then you're telling us what you're about to do.
Let's do that.
As we're interjecting.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Okay.
So what's the scenario here?
Okay. So here's the scenario.
Okay.
You've lost your faith. And
Me?
No, listeners. I'm looking at listeners and viewers. You've lost your faith, and your parents. I'm going to play the role of dad. Kara, you're going to play the role of mom. Is that okay?
I think it's better if it's only just one person, right? It's
A
too
2-on-1
hard.
is a little tougher,
Yeah.
but if it's more of a realistic situation, am I going to be the doubting
Yes.
LDS church member,
Yes.
the doubting Mormon?
You're going to represent the viewers for how they might approach.
Great. And you're going to be my parents, basically.
We'll be your
We can
parents.
do 2. I think that'd be okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Kara and I, our participation is going to be lighter because we really want to give you a chance to explain it, and we're just going to provide structure, not a lot of content.
Give me a
Is
little
that okay?
structure. Sure.
Okay. So viewers, listeners, you've lost your faith. You want to come out to your parents. Let's say that they've caught on, or your spouse, and they know that you've lost your faith, and so they're coming at you. They're coming at you with their doubts and their questions and their concerns, and you can feel that the conversation is not going where you want it to go. And so that's Anthony, where you're going to kind of step in. And so we'll start. It sounds like you're going to start with informed consent. It sounds like you're going to start with kind of saying, is it okay if we try something slightly different? Is that the first?
That's probably what I would say, or say something like, Mom and Dad, do you have a few minutes where we can talk about things? I know I've been struggling. I know, are they aware that I've been struggling? Am I surprising them with this information, or are they aware of it?
They know. They know. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's say maybe don't try epistemology in the super early stages where things are super heated, because when the amygdala is triggered and people are in their fight, flight, or freeze mode, it's probably not the right scenario for people to be really introspective.
Sure. And
do you agree?
I agree. Yeah. You want to have people calm and relaxed, and they're not stressed or looking at their phones or in the middle of watching a TV program, that they have the time to do it.
Yeah.
The other thing too is you need to ask yourself,
Set and setting. We're talking about set and setting here.
oh yeah.
To borrow a term I learned from the psilocybin community.
Oh, interesting. I need to get into that community. It's interesting to me. So one thing I think you need to ask yourself right away is am I here to reveal my position and answer any questions that my parents or my family members have about my view? That might be one thing. And also, am I interested in challenging my parents or my loved ones about their position? Because there's two things going on here. My parents or my loved ones likely have lots of questions for why I don't believe. And I'm completely fine answering and role-playing how I would deal with that. But my question is, am I also interested in challenging my loved ones about their position? Is this the right moment for it? So sometimes you might want to make your initial conversation about why you don't believe, because there's probably a lot of questions that they have. What did I do wrong? How did my loved one come to this conclusion and leave the church? Like, they're probably really struggling with a lot of guilt and remorse and that type of thing. So you might want to address that first before you switch into stage 2, maybe, which is now I'm going to actually challenge them in a respectful manner about how they why they still think that this is true. There's two things going on here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's putting it in stage 2 kind of context is as a good way, because there's a lot of grief that comes with Mormon families it's a high demand fundamentalist religion. And so when you do leave it, there's a lot of emotion and grief, like you're saying, attached to it. So this is probably, yes, something that's more down the road when my parents still think that they can get me back, even though I do this for a living, but when they accept, that they accept that no amount of really convincing is going to get you back in the church. But again, most Mormon parents probably think no matter what, if they give good reasons. So maybe that's a reason that they would enter into this conversation. Because like, if I could give foundational reasons of why I believe these things, maybe I can get them back. So
see, that's great. That's a good thing also to ask is, what is their motivation for wanting to have this conversation?
Right.
Whose motivation is it? Is it me as the non-believer that's motivated to talk to my parents to challenge them about their view, or am I trying to take away some of their worry? What is the motivation of the parents or the loved ones? Are they trying to bring me back into the fold? Are they trying to better understand me? Is it both? You really kind of have to, and it may not even be a bad idea to talk about what your goals are before you even, in fact, that's the first step of street epistemology, is you ask yourself, what am I hoping to achieve here? What would be a success? What are the different factors at play here? Taking a step back and really thinking about it from a broad perspective.
Okay, let's start.
We call it step 0, basically.
Okay, so what's step 0 of epistemology?
Step 0 is a street epistemology is essentially having a dialogue with yourself about what you're hoping to achieve and what you would consider a success, and then considering other things that might be at play, including what are your goals, what are the attitudes of the people involved? Am I dealing with open-minded people or very closed-minded people? Is it a one-on-one? Is it a two-on-one? How much time is available? That type of stuff. That's like the first step.
And I think you probably have some suggestions of what the goals shouldn't be, correct?
Well, the goals really are up to the participant. So try to think of street epistemology as a tool set. These are tools that I can employ to accomplish lots of things. You could use SE with a loved one to show that they don't have any standing in their view that God is real, for example, and that could begin the deconversion process for them. So that could be a goal of somebody using SE. It all really depends on your goal.
But we talked about ethics yesterday, and it might not be, from a mental health professional standpoint, it's not ethical to try and take someone's beliefs away from them. So I would have guessed you would say you wouldn't recommend that ethically as a goal for SE.
Here's my, it's really tough because you can use the tool for that, and a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And I've even used it for that. So if I think somebody has a belief that's not true and it's harmful to them and others, and they're actively promoting it, that crosses the threshold for me, the ethical threshold, to be like, I think I have an obligation to talk with this person. But here's what I think makes it most ethical, is revealing what your goals are. So I could say
at the outset?
At the outset.
Okay.
Which it can be risky, right?
that changes it.
Hey, mom and dad, just so you know, I've learned this technique of questioning that could really allow you to reflect on this to the point where you may start to question it and doubt it and want to leave it alone. Are you okay with that?
I almost worry that makes it a non-starter with our population.
It can, but if you want to make it ethical, it might be the thing that you need to do. Now, you could probably soften the delivery of it or spread that out over the course of several weeks to prepare them for that possibility. But
I just have to admit,
it could result in a very defensive conversation partner from the start.
I really just like the idea that you kind of shared yesterday, which is that you're just trying to help them become more reflective about and conscious about why they believe what they do, period. And let them have their own journey with it.
That's probably like the first initial entry point into SE until you realize that you can weaponize it if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And that's where early on, we're developing this course for SE, and one of the modules is ethical considerations. And it's one of the very early modules because we know that's a big deal.
Yeah, but I think it's worth it to invest the time to have these, like you said, ethical conversations, hard conversations with our parents, because Mormonism has so many beliefs within it that are tied to really, men and women, sexism, homophobia, being like anti-transgender people. And there's just so many things that are tied up to it. And so I'll be asking my parents questions in a kind of a light SE format because I want to get to the root of why they believe so strongly about the Book of Mormon, that it really happened in this American heartland, that, Native Americans were cursed Jews, basically.
It's racist, you're saying. It's racist.
Yes, like there's I wanted to put the time and investment into it because my parents believe blatantly racist things about Native Americans, about the curse of Cain with Black people. And if I can nuance their belief around maybe you shouldn't believe it so dogmatically like you had before, it's worth putting in the time.
Well, we talked about dogmatism yesterday and this idea of being 100% sure, and try to think of beliefs as we're using a tree metaphor for the course. So these things like, where do I stand on gay marriage or trans rights? These are branches of a tree where if you follow the root back, it usually comes down to the religion. So that's why when I'm engaging with somebody, I'm interested in why they've concluded that their higher power is real, because it has implications for so many of those other branches. But just really quickly, to circle back to the ethical part of it, you can use SE to change people's minds, but I think here's where I think it makes it acceptable. Especially if you're obtaining informed consent, which is probably like the second step. We call it like step 2 is letting people know what you're up to and making sure that they agree to it. But ultimately, people's beliefs can only be changed by themselves. They are the only ones that can do it.
That's right.
So I can ask you all the questions in the world that are great questions, and it's up to you to decide what you want to do with it.
Yeah, they're grown-ass adults.
It's not like I've got this list of questions that it's guaranteed that if I ask them, you're going to deconvert. No. It doesn't work that way.
No. In fact, it can often backfire.
It can often backfire, especially if you haven't done the initial steps of thinking about the ethical considerations and obtaining informed consent, as well as building rapport. You really want to have a nice relationship with this person, because when people are open and honest, you're going to get real true answers, the true representation of what their belief structure looks like. And if you haven't done the legwork, the questions won't land. But ultimately, what happens with those questions is up to your conversation partner.
Yeah. So the scenario that I just wanted to lay out in the ethics conversation is, let's just say the person who was a drug addict, an opiate addict, and religion for them in their minds was what pulled them out. Or they've had a loved one die and it made them super depressed and they didn't want to live, and then religion is what pulled them out. Or it's a 90-year-old grandma dying of cancer, and she's never going to change her views probably, and even if she did, it might not even be good for her. I think I've seen you do SE enough, and I've talked to you enough to know that there are scenarios when you start going down the road of asking questions, you touch on points where you're like, whoa, I don't even think it would be good for us to continue this conversation. And if I had known you were believing for these reasons, I probably wouldn't have even started.
Yes.
That's what I was trying to get at by saying that there are some times where you're just like, yeah, we probably shouldn't have this conversation at all.
Right.
True? When are those?
Well, it's whenever it crosses your mind, maybe I shouldn't be having this talk. When that thought goes through your mind,
that it'll do more harm to the person than good, right?
Exactly. When you think, if I ask a few more questions, they may really start to doubt this, and I don't know if they're prepared for it yet. So then what you can do is you can shift to what you're worried about. Like with your guest here today, we talked a little bit about, I don't know his background, but if somebody's giving the indication that they would harm themselves or other people, then
without their beliefs,
without holding this belief or thinking that the belief is true, then I think I would ask them if they would like to shift to explore why they think that that's the case. So we're no longer talking about what's bolstering their reason. We're exploring why they think they need to have it.
Okay.
So you can still make progress, because some people will say, well, yeah, I literally would harm other people if I didn't have this.
Or myself. Or
themselves. But with a little questioning, you may realize that they were just taught that. They were just taught to think that I would harm other people or myself if I didn't believe that it's true.
Yeah, we're taught as Mormons that without the church, we would cheat on our spouses and lie and steal and kill people. Yeah. Because why wouldn't you?
Right.
And many Christians say that to me.
And you're surrounded by people who are living the believing life, and they have stable marriages, so everything that you see bolsters that idea. But it's not until you really think about it, like, how would I be any different if I didn't think that this was true? Yeah. It's a question that a lot of people don't ask themselves, but it could be an important one.
Okay, so we've got step 0 is
Pre-prep, figuring out what's going on, ethical considerations. The second step is, do I have informed consent?
informed
Meaning,
consent.
do they understand what's going on and are they on board with it?
Okay.
And that's two things, right? It's not just being on board with it, but you want to make sure that they understand what's going on.
Okay.
And rapport. These are like the first two steps,
Rapport.
right? Building some rapport, some genuine rapport, not fake, how's the weather, but like really connecting with them if you can.
And Mormon missionaries are taught, it's called building relationships of trust. BRT is the term. It's actually can be used as a manipulative sales technique.
Sure.
Oh, look at that picture of you and your cute family. Tell me about your dog. What's your dog's name?
Right.
It can be a cynical.
It can be a fake thing.
Yeah.
Our advice is to only ask questions that you really want to know the answers to.
Yeah.
Don't make up stuff. Just like, what brings you here today? Like, how long have you known John? That type of thing. That would be like good question to ask people, and really try to distinguish the person from the beliefs that you'll be exploring later is a really big part of it. And then the third step, I suppose, is establishing the claim, like figuring out what is the fact claim about reality that this person is making. And that could be several conversations sometimes, because sometimes people's conception of God might be wildly different than what you've expected. I've noticed that a lot when I'm interviewing people on the street. Getting into definition of a word that you would think is a very basic word can be wildly different. Now, it may be fairly similar in a culture like this here in Salt Lake City, where everyone's believing in the same God and they're mostly of the same religion. You probably won't get a lot of pushback on that, but actually figuring out what the claim is, working out the terms, defining these words. And here's the key part of it, I suppose, is even though I may have a different definition of one of these words, it's my conversation partner's definition that's important when we're exploring their reasoning. So the last thing that you would ever want to do is say, well, it seems that we have a disagreement of what this word means. Let's go with my definition as the questioner. Why would you ever want to do that? You're exploring their beliefs, their claims, their reasoning process. So going off of their terms is really good. And maybe at this third stage, this identifying the claim stage is, actually, I think we broke it up now. It's this fourth stage of identifying a person's level of confidence that the claim is true. You've probably heard this on SE videos where we ask, on a scale from 1 to 7 or from 0 to 10 or 0 to 100, how sure are you that this is really true? And a lot of people just instinctively say 100, maybe because they think that they should, or they think that there's an obligation possibly to do it, or maybe they really are 100% sure that this is real. A little bit more of a reflectful thinker might say, well, I'm 99% sure. Sometimes you get people say, I'm 120% sure. It's off the charts. I'm so sure that this is true. But it's just a guide. It's to get a sense of where they are, and you could possibly revisit it. But it's not a stick in the mud goal of, now I need to see how we can move this. This is a self-reported assessment of where they are in terms of their certainty, and they may have really good reasons for being sure that that's true. So it could be really tempting to try to think that the belief scale confidence level thing is a goal of SE, that's your marker for measuring your progress. I suppose it depends on your goal, if that is your goal to move somebody along on a belief. But we found it's a really good way of framing the conversation that I'm not interested in the binary proposition of whether the God exists or not. I think we both agree that the God either exists or doesn't. I'm interested in how sure you are of your conclusion on that question. And that's what we're doing with the confidence scale.
So for those who haven't watched your videos yet, you're usually standing on the street with a whiteboard.
Yeah.
Somebody walks up, and we'll come back. We'll circle back to the believing parents. Let's just say it's a
we just random. Get off of that, didn't we?
No. I do. Let's come back to it after Sean, because I think it is really important. That's what our audience is going to care about most. But just to lay down the architecture of SE prior to Sean coming, you're standing on the street with a clipboard, with a whiteboard. Right. Somebody walks up, and let's not go into the detail to role play. They'll say, oh, hey, what are you doing? You'll say, at an architecture level, you'll say.
So just for your audience, just so that they are aware, the standing on the street with a whiteboard to initiate a talk is something that I did to get examples to show people how to do SE in their daily lives.
They don't need a whiteboard.
They don't need to go out on the street and do this. So I want to get that out of the way. But so when I was going out on the street and talking with people, I would ask them.
So let's do it. So hi,
hello, John.
I'm John.
What's up, John?
And we're not going to actually role play,
Yeah.
Let's talk about it in an outline structure. So I come up to you and say, hi, I'm John. Then you do what?
I would also introduce myself and ask them if they have a little time for a short chat.
And then I would say, sure, yeah, I'll do a little chat.
Now, if I got that kind of response, I'd probably say, well, would you like to know a little bit more about what I'm doing? Because usually people are wondering about that.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit.
Well, what I like to do is pick a belief that you think is true, a belief that causes you to act out because you think that it's true. So, something fairly significant in your life that you think is true. And I'd like to ask you questions to explore how you concluded that it's actually true.
So then I say, well, I believe Jesus is our Lord and Savior and the Holy Bible is his infallible word. And then you say?
I would probably repeat that back. Okay. Right.
So repeat it back.
I would say, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you think that there's this God named Jesus, and are you saying the main reason why you think that God is real is because it says so in the Bible?
And it's been manifested to me by the Holy Ghost.
Okay. Of those two, when you say it's been manifested to you of the Holy Ghost, what exactly are you saying? Is that how you confirm that it's
true? He's written it on my heart.
He's written it on your heart. What do you mean exactly by that?
He's slipping in. Okay, so you start to drill down.
I want to understand my terms. So you said something that a lot of your listeners may know exactly what you mean by that,
right?
But I don't. And even if I did, it's still useful for me to explain it because you might get 3 Mormons who have different definitions of what that term means.
For sure.
So I want to understand what you mean by it written in your heart. Yeah.
So you ask me what I believe. I tell you. Mm-hmm. You repeat it back to me. And you start asking a little bit more details to really be able to pin it down.
Right. Now, normally I probably would have spent a little time at the start building a little bit of rapport. This is one area where I tend to forget doing when I'm doing street interviews because I'm trying to keep it very brief. But hopefully we've made a connection and you're on board with what we're doing and all this other stuff. But
so once I've answered kind of the basics of my belief to your satisfaction, you repeat it back to me.
Right.
We solidify on it.
Right. I might ask you how sure you are from 1 to 10.
And then you'd ask the certainty.
True.
And so I'd say, I'm more certain than if I saw Jesus now, I'm more certain than if he were standing in front of me. So 120%.
Okay. I don't usually push back too much when somebody goes above and beyond. Like it could be tempting to say, but you can't be more than 100% sure. Or that's dogmatism. It could be really tempting to kind of slip into that. But what I'm getting is that you really think it's true. And then what would you say is the main reason why? I would ask them why they think it. Is it because it says so in the book, or is there something else going on?
I've read the Bible and the Holy Ghost has manifested it to me. Something like that.
Okay. Are those two separate? This is what I'm wondering. Are you raising two separate reasons, or
what's the most common answer you get from an evangelical?
It says so in the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go with that. It says so in the book.
Okay.
And we're just trying to lay out the main principles.
Yeah. So usually what I would do here is to make sure that I'm understanding properly and then ask something along the lines of, a good outsider test would be helpful here. If we ran into somebody from a completely different religion and they were coming to the conclusion that a completely different God existed, and we asked them, collaboratively, we asked them how they concluded that it was true, and they said that it's written in their holy book. What would you think about their reasoning? I would ask them to, so we're framing your view or this person's view through the lens of somebody else who's coming to a different conclusion. And by the way, it's not me. I didn't put that on myself. This is some fictional person that's walking by.
So you would say to me something about the Muslims, give the sentence.
Usually I'll go Hindu because the monotheistic religions, usually people say, but it's all the same God or something like that. So usually I say, let's say, Hindu happened to be walking by and they read in their holy book that Vishnu is real. Do you think that they're factually correct in their conclusion? I would ask them something along the line. I want to inspire them to be thinking about that person's reasoning that is also their reasoning. In essence, they're thinking about their own reasoning process, but without the pressure.
Yeah.
Right? We're thinking about somebody else, this hypothetical person walking by.
And so I can imagine a couple of responses. One might be, well, God's everywhere and God manifests himself in different forms to different people. That could be one route. Yep. Another route could be,
well, they're just wrong.
Satan is a powerful deceiver, and sometimes people are deceived. Or there's just the humble one, which is like, I don't want to judge other people's experiences. Everyone can have their own.
Okay, so if that latter one is really interesting. Sometimes the response that you'll get, especially with younger people, it seems, is this idea of, well, everybody is correct. Like I kind of get a mix. They might say something like, well, that Hindu is just as correct as I, and who am I to say that they're wrong? So if I ever get a sense that somebody's thinking in relativistic terms, then I explore if they agree that there's a factual truth to the claim, that either the God exists or not.
So how would you say that in words to me?
I would probably say something like, actually, I usually carry a box of Tic Tacs with me. I don't know if you've ever noticed me doing that. If I ever get the sense that somebody might be thinking in relativistic terms, which opens the door for belief without any justification whatsoever, really, when you think about it, because if I can just believe whatever I want to make it true, which essentially is the relativistic thinking, then we've got larger issues. So I'll probably do a quick check to make sure that they're not thinking relativistically by asking, in this box of candies, would you say that the total number of pieces within is either even or odd? And it can't simultaneously be both. And that is a really good way of helping people think like, okay, yeah, either the Vishnu God is real or it's not, or either Jehovah is real or not, or that type of thing. So it's really good to make sure that the person is thinking that truth is objective. If they don't, then that's a really big sticking point, and you have to focus on that.
Okay. So as we're now thinking back to the main steps, where do some of the other steps come into play? You said there's 10?
Well, there's I would say there's 7 or 8.
Okay. Where do we pick up on those?
Well, what I would do is try to get to the epistemology now. This is where, how could we actually tell which of the two? Let's say that they do agree that truth is objective and that somebody who believes in Vishnu is objectively incorrect and somebody who believes in my God is objectively correct. I might ask something like, well, what do you think is the best way for us to go about determining which of the two of you is correct? If you're both using similar processes to get to different conclusions, and we acknowledge that at least one of those two conclusions is incorrect, how do we tell the difference between the two? And it's that how question. It's getting to their reasoning. This is getting to their epistemology. How are they verifying that the reason that they're giving is a good one? Because we've just produced this scenario where there's this hypothetical person that thinks differently.
And I don't know how to channel evangelicals so much, but I can imagine something like, you know what? That's what faith is. Faith is something where you don't always have all the evidence, but you feel it and you come to know it, and you can't really explain it. And if it were scientific, it would be science, but it's not. It's the realm of spirituality. And so spirituality is different, and I just know it, and I can't always explain it to your satisfaction.
Okay.
Is that normal or not?
No, it's very normal.
Okay.
So yeah, usually faith is one of the last bastions of holding on to the belief.
So I went there quick.
You went there. I mean, that's usually where people do tend to go. And it can be tempting to want to drive the conversation and say, like very early on, I might say, well, is this all based on faith? Don't do that. Don't bring the conversation to where you think it's going to go or should go.
Why?
Well, because it's their belief.
Yeah.
Why would I want to misrepresent your belief or introduce concepts that you're not bringing up? Now, faith may be a reason why you think that it's true, but you just forgot to bring it up or it didn't cross your mind. I suppose that's possible. It's one of the reasons why we want to try to keep the conversation short and invite people back so that they can be coming back. Like somebody may have forgotten to bring up faith as a reason or something, but then they saw me out there again and they come back and want to talk about it. But yeah, faith is usually one of those last bastions.
Okay, before faith, what if I say, I think it was the missionary, one of the Mormon missionaries. He's like, well, I lived a dark path. I drank, I smoked, I had sex. I was super miserable and unhappy. So then I planted the seed of faith and I started living the Mormon gospel and my life blossomed. And so by living the word, I came to know it was true.
Sure.
What if they say that?
Very, very common. So that's an appeal to personal experience in a way. One of the first things that you should do in a personal experience.
What's wrong with that?
Well, we can get to it. I mean, maybe there isn't anything wrong with it, but possibly there is. One of the first things that I would do is acknowledge their hardship. So, don't just blow that off and say, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Like, be genuine in it. I'm really sorry that you struggle with it. And I'm genuinely glad that you're better today. However, I'm curious if somebody could struggle with some things, believe in something and see their life improve as a result of it, and the thing that they're believing in is not true? Could somebody have an improved life based on a belief that's not true? Is it possible?
So you're continually sort of, whatever it is they believe or wherever it is they believe it, you ask about people in other contexts with different sets of beliefs, whether people could arrive at the same conclusions for a totally different set of content-based reasons.
Well, it's essentially, it's painting a picture using their justification so that they can see it very clearly, right? You're constructing a painting of their beliefs for them to look at and inspect and see, is this a good, reliable, robust way to say that this is true? Like, for example, a question like that could elicit a response of, yeah, I suppose it is possible for somebody to believe something that is true that isn't and see their life improve as a result. Therefore, maybe my improved life, even though I value it and cherish it and I think it's wonderful, maybe that's not the best way or the best reason to say that this claim is actually true. If people can achieve that without this specific belief, but it's not me telling them this, it's them discovering this on their own as they're relating their beliefs to you.
Because it's that language that's really important where you say, is it possible that they can just like go off into kind of a hypothetical?
Right.
You're not asking them like, do you realize how stupid it sounds? Like you're not putting on any kind of projection onto like, the outsider's test, just giving them the possibility, like you said, the framework that if they were to apply the same way that they arrived at the truth, if it was applied to a different religion, would they still think that that's a good method of arriving at truth? That's why I think like Essie has really, getting the language is really important on that.
Language is really critical. Like even words like we, how could we figure this out? It shifts it into a collaborative thing. Like, well, how would you figure it out?
So we is good or we is not good?
We is better.
Okay.
I want to work with you to figure out how you concluded that this is true, because if we realize that your reasoning process is suspect, I want to help you discover this. I'll actually tell people this literally to their face. However, if your reasoning process is sound and good, I may want to consider adopting your belief and believing it too. So approaching these conversations from a place of openness is really good, because I think that comes through with your language, and I think it helps people stay open if they think that you're open to their views. And I really think that you should be when you're going about this.
What do you do when somebody tries to slip into content? So whether it's trying to talk about evolution or it's this or that verse in the Bible, King James says blah, blah, blah.
Right.
What do you do when people try and pull you in to a debate about content?
Well,
that happens, right?
Well, sure. I mean, people, like, I'm trying to drill down to their reasoning process, and some people are really focused on the message, like, let me communicate the good news to you. Here's a good opportunity to preach, or something along those lines. If that comes up, I remind them that I'm not really so much interested in the claim itself and all the good things that come from the belief. I'm interested in how you concluded that it's true. So do you mind if we go there? But if they mention evolution, or what was the other example?
Bible, just some Bible verse.
A Bible verse.
Or something some leader said,
Right.
like authority, appeal to authority.
A really good question is something along the lines of, like, if you hadn't discovered that verse, or if you didn't observe that person say that line, or if that line happened to not be in that book, would you be just as sure that this claim is factually true? And more than likely, well, yeah. But sometimes they may say, well, no, like, me thinking that evolution is false and that the things had to have been created is the biggest reason for thinking that this is true. So sometimes you get there's a revelation of reasons that happen in this exchange, and that's what you're really looking to find. Is I want to uncover with you the biggest reason why you think that this is true. And it could be evolution, it could be something that they wrote in the book, or prophecies in books or something. But doing a quick check, like, if we work together for the next 2 weeks and you realize to your satisfaction that there's good evidence for evolution, that it likely did happen, would you notice a decrease in your conclusion that God is real? You always want to try to bring it back to their certainty, their confidence that their fact claim is true, right? Because I don't want to be talking about reasons that maybe don't contribute to this. Because my goal is to help us understand how you concluded that it's true, and I want to find what those reasons are.
Okay. Okay, so as you're thinking through your steps, what's next? Where are we?
Usually at this point, you've hit a moment where the person is now thinking about their reasoning process.
Hopefully.
Yeah, it usually is almost always the case when I do it. And
because believers come to you with like a shield up, like a shield against themselves,
Sometimes.
like a shield between their deep inner conscious self and the words you're saying. And it's, I'm sure there's this moment where either you do or don't see that shield kind of get removed, where they actually shift into a state of insight where they're actually processing.
Well, I like the metaphor of the shield actually, because the shield is the belief. And if you recall, we're not interested in the belief claim. We're interested in your reasoning process. So very early on, the shield is being put off to the side and the weapons are being put down. We're not battling here. This isn't a battle. This is a conversation to explore your reasoning process. And now people can see the implications for their shield, their belief, I suppose, when you're starting to ask this. Sometimes you see the shield creep up where somebody like, well, exactly what are you out here doing? Or where do you stand on this claim? Sometimes you get some pushback.
Yep. Well,
because I think people understand, like, I've never thought about how I concluded that this is a good reason. And that's a good point. Like that Hindu person is using the exact same process for Vishnu. And then
have you seen that? I haven't seen an episode yet where somebody is like really taken back and kind of like shaken by the end. I'm sure you've got 1,000, so I'm sure that exists. But like with the Mormon missionaries, they're never going to ever let you see them sweat. Almost never. And, you know, the evangelical guy I saw, I don't know if his name was Caleb, but he was just like, he had his buddy with him and, you know, he was in preacher mode the whole time. You know what I mean?
You get a lot of that. More often than not, though, I think usually at this stage of the conversation, there's a moment of reflection or thoughtful thinking. And it might even be an extra second of pause, especially if it's a very dug-in believer who's very resolute and there's a lot at stake with this belief with them. Sometimes, but almost always there's that moment of thoughtfulness that happens. And then I ask myself, this is usually where me as the questioner, I ask myself, is this a good time to end it? Because it could be really tempting to keep going. Like,
oh, if you reach that's the end for you of the conversation?
It could be. Yeah, it could be. Because I've recognized that if I keep pushing, it could move too fast for them.
What do you mean by that?
I think people need time to process these beliefs and the implications of them.
See, that's where there's so much restraint in what you do.
Yeah.
Because you don't, when I watch you, you're not out for blood.
No.
You seem to care about the well-being of the person.
You need to have empathy to do this. If you don't have empathy for the person,
it can be reckless and violent.
It can be reckless.
Yeah.
You can do it cruel. You can do a cruel version of SE, I suppose. But how are you going to maintain rapport and get to the root of it and help people stay open and reflective?
And the Hippocratic method of do no harm, right? You want to do no harm.
Ideally.
Right?
Right. So that's why I usually move slower than maybe other people would. I mean, maybe earlier on I was a little more reckless because I didn't understand the implications of the questions that I was asking until I started getting feedback from those people. Like there was one guy who said, after that interview, I went to the bathroom and cried for an hour. My friends had to come by and pick me off the floor. So it could be tempting. So that exchange we had, you mentioned the word faith. You brought up the word faith really quickly. And yeah, I was just thinking that's a situation where you might want to ask yourself, okay, we've been talking for 20 minutes. Now we're down to faith. Where do I want to go with this? And if I'm in doubt, I may say, I've got a little bit more time and I would love to keep asking you questions. However, I don't want to overwhelm you. If you think that this is a good time to end the talk so that you can think about what we talked about and maybe come back up to me later, are you cool with that? I'll usually extend the invitation. And if they say, no, I'm good, let's keep going. Then I might say, okay, well, what exactly do you mean by faith? Can we define what you mean by that word? And how big of a factor is faith in this belief for you? If faith wasn't at your disposal, would it impact your confidence? Do you need faith? These are all the questions that are going through my mind, but don't ask them all shotgun like that. You want to just go very slow and methodically and don't overwhelm somebody.
Okay. I am dying to know if we are going to be able to get Sean to that point of like open, vulnerable reflection where he says, yeah, I don't know why I believe her, or yeah, I acknowledge that my beliefs are not on necessarily a solid foundation. I'm curious to see whether we'll get Sean to that point of vulnerability.
We can only go where he's willing to take us.
Yeah.
And there are things that I can do to facilitate it. There are things that I can do to make him comfortable. We're surrounded by 7 cameras or something like that, right?
4.
So, and it's taken me a day to just
snort?
be comfortable.
I snorted. It's the coffee. I'm blaming it on the coffee.
There you go. So, I mean, this is a somewhat artificial environment, and he likely has followers and an image to uphold. So there's certain challenges to this kind of setup, as opposed to if he and I were on a plane ride and just chatting.
Yeah.
It's a completely different scenario.
It reminds me of the John Adams book where they talked about posterity letters. It's one thing if you're writing a letter to a loved one. It's another thing if you're writing a letter to a loved one that you know it's going to appear in a history book someday, right? You write to them differently than if you know there's going to be an audience. And so, but it's fun. It's fun.
And that goes for me too, but
yeah, well, we all do it.
Yeah. I mean, I have an image to uphold too. Like this is an interview that I would like to go well, because I think it could it could possibly reflect negatively on SE if it didn't go well. But I just try to set those pressures aside and just try to connect with the person and figure out what their reasoning is and go where they take me.
So what other steps do we want to cover before Sean comes? And what other, and
We're near the end.
I'm pretty amazed you can remember all the steps just off the top of your head, but I guess you've been doing this a long time.
I've been living this for 8 years and developing it from,
All right. So where are we in the steps? What have we not covered?
I guess we're near the end here, where there's likely a moment of reflection about their methodology. This is that we've reached the moment where they're reflecting on how they determined that this is a good reason. And I'll usually offer to end the conversation. That usually involves me thanking them for their time, giving them a way to contact me, which is really important because people do want to talk with you later or introduce you to their pastor or who knows what, or say, please don't use that video. I get that sometimes. And I'll give them, lately I've been giving a puzzle piece thing, like a little gift that if you assemble it, it makes this ring. So I want to invite them to come back for more talks. We shake hands. Oh, and then I usually ask them if they have any questions for me. I forgot about that. While SE, I think, works best when it's a one-way directed interview where I get like 15 or 20 minutes directly, that's artificial. It would be very tough to do that with a family member who's been conversing with you normally your entire life, to suddenly shift to an interview mode. But whether it's a regular conversation where we're using SE or we're doing an on-the-street thing, I'll usually invite the person, if they haven't already asked where I stand, like, would you like to know where I stand on your claim? And that's,
you do ask that.
I do. And sometimes
someone asks you, like, what's your confidence in God or the Bible? And you were like, I'll give it 1%.
I put it down at 1. What? Your eyes bug out. So yeah, I try to offer to explain that to people if they want. A lot of times people are surprised by, this is the cool thing. I'm always happy when somebody says, I'm glad that you're asking me to ask you questions now because I have no idea where you stand on this claim. I don't know if you're a believer.
That's a compliment.
I don't know if you're an atheist.
That's a compliment, right?
I see that as a compliment because I think that demonstrates to me that I was as unbiased as possible in my questioning, hopefully, because I do want to make it about them. And if there's any indication that I was guiding somebody to a conclusion that I want to bring them to or something, then I would see that as a failure. I really don't want to do that. I don't want to bring you to my view. I want you to be able to see how you came to your view and if you're fine with your process. That's all I want to do. And then leave you alone to see if you're okay with that. And a lot of people aren't. And that can start the deconversion process for a lot of people.
Yeah. We got something, Karen?
Just as a follow-up to that, I was looking at your frequently asked questions on the SE website, and apparently, yes, one of them is, I disagree with what my interlocutor has claimed. Should I tell them? And it kind of has like a mixed answer there. So kind of sounds it's up to like personal preference, but it sounds like you kind of try to keep your opinion about what their claim is completely on the back burner until they ask. Like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so it's a personal call whether or not you want to reveal that you disagree with them or not. So I found that it's probably the most ethical thing is the second that they express an interest in your view, you should probably reveal it rather than to demur and say, well, I'll get to it at the end of the talk, or I'd rather not say. Like, why would you want to do that? You're expecting them to be open. You might as well be open too. So my advice would be to share your position, but include with it the caveat that you're open to changing your mind on it. Hopefully you are. Like, I don't think that there are any gods, because I think that the evidence that I've been presented so far is poor. However, I'm open to looking at any evidence that somebody can give to me for that.
And you're modeling what we described last night as epistemic humility, right? Which I think you, even Anthony Boghossian Anthony Magnabosco, you would want to model epistemic humility as you're engaging in this conversation.
Yeah. The entire time that I'm having this exchange, I'm trying to model the behavior that I'd like them to give back to me. So if I'm being thoughtful in my questions, maybe they'll be thoughtful in their questions back to me. If I'm giving them time to think about something, like if I ask them to define a word, I would hope that if I say a word that they don't understand, that they would ask me to define it and give me plenty of time to do so too. So yeah, I'm trying to set a good example of a conversation partner, so that if the tables do get turned, we can just use the same technique. I don't want people to debate with me. Like your guest coming today, the last thing I want to do is debate with him. He can ask me any question he wants, and I'm hopeful that he gives me plenty of time to answer it as clearly and concisely as I possibly can.
Yeah. Sometimes what do you do if one of your participants says, I feel like you're interrogating me. I feel like you are challenging me and trying to take my faith away from me because you're asking me all these questions that are making me uncomfortable. And it feels like you're trying to take my faith away from me. Do they ever say something like that? Like, stop interrogating me. I don't like this.
I don't think that. Maybe
is that rare?
It's happened a little bit, but I've heard of situations where that's happened with people. There's a 3-part series of videos on my channel with a man who discovered Street Epistemology and realized that his wife is a young earth creationist. They have 2 kids, and she's teaching them that the earth is young and so forth. And he immediately went into SE mode, and it kind of blew up in his face. So there are ways to go about doing this where you can avoid that resistance in the first place. Like I said, I think I suggested offering to do an interview. Let's shift. I want to move into a mode of conversation where I'm just directly interviewing you. Then we can end it and go back to our regular thing. You can do that. But if you ever get pushback from somebody who thinks that you're doing something that's problematic or manipulative, don't become defensive. Don't blow off what they have to say. Don't, I think maybe our guest is here.
No, yeah. Go ahead.
So take it seriously. Take their concerns seriously. And I would ask them, I'm sorry that you got that impression. That isn't my goal, if that isn't your goal. Or you could say, well, one of my goals here is to help you discover that maybe you don't have a good reason for thinking that this is true. And your response here, what I'm observing with you now, by calling attention to it the way that you have, it makes me wonder if you're starting to wonder about your reasons or your reasoning process. I would get meta about it. I wouldn't just blow it off or ignore it, but I'd say, like, I find it interesting that you're responding in this way. Another thing that you can do is say, well, what questions specifically did I ask that led you to that conclusion? And you may say, well, okay, when I was framing that question, what I meant to do was this, and I'm sorry that you got that impression. So I would just deal with it. Don't blow it off.
I love it. Yeah. Well, Sean McCraney just arrived in our studio. Okay. So we've been a little bit conceptual. We've hopefully given you our listeners and viewers, overview of this episode. So we're going to bring this part 2 to a close, and we're going to come right back where hopefully Sean McCraney sits down with Anthony Magnabosco, and they're going to do Street Epistemology live, hot, on the spot. And then I hope I want to try and process this with Sean after you do it. Awesome. And see what that was like for Sean to experience Street Epistemology.
Should I leave the room so he's more honest and open? I wonder if
No. He'll be.
I don't want him to hold back.
Sean's super honest and he's a great guy. Cool. So I think it's going to be fine.
Awesome.
But so thank you, Anthony, for this part 2.
Yeah.
Listeners, viewers, hope you've liked it. Please come back for part 3 because we think it's going to be really fun. All right. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.